Good morning. Of course, Richard Clark, and I'm back again. Um, I suppose this video series can be broken down into two main sort of chapters or two main parts. The first part, which is what I've done in the last 12 videos, that's including this one, is to explain the history of addiction, the mechanics of addiction, to get inside the definition of it. And then the next video and through to the end of the series, we'll be talking about the specific route that you must take in order to get recovered from them. And Bill Wilson started to codify this and write this down in a way that we could understand in 1939 with this publication of the Big Book. Now, certainly there's a lot of material in the Big Book that I personally, as a therapist, disagree with. But I have to remember that even in spite of the fact that I disagree with a lot of the stuff that's in the book, especially the part about religion and forgiveness and God, Bill Wilson gave us the first template of the process of recovery out of addiction. Now, this may sound kind of self-serving, but what I want to accomplish in this video series is to create an awareness of how incredibly complicated addiction is or recovery from addiction is. And one of the major disservices that we've managed to do in the last 50 or 75 years is to oversimplify this. You know, it's just a matter of, well, you're just going to quit drinking and you're going to try and be a nice guy and that's the end of it. I think that that's, I don't know how to say it, notoriously ineffective. Uh, that's why we have upwards of a 90 or 95% failure rate of people who are getting out of addiction treatment. So, this is incredibly complicated and more complicated than most of the therapists and counselors and sort of religious organizations and treatment centers, more complicated than any of them understand. Now, in order to help simplify this, I think, which is a little bit contradictory to what I just said, I'm going to try and simplify something that's incredibly complicated. One of the ways that I look at this is I compare it to the social standard of uh, surgery, major surgery. So, one of the things that I admire and one of the things that we should be proud of in this culture is that through the Medical Association and our devotion to healing and surgery, we have created incredibly high standards of professional competence. If you're going to be a surgeon, you have to know a whole lot of things about a whole lot of different subjects. And we have specializations where surgeons are incredibly knowledgeable about a specific area of treatment. A person who is a brain surgeon knows a whole lot about everything from the neck up. And a person who is sort of an abdominal surgeon or maybe a colon cancer specialist will know a whole lot of things about that specific area of surgery. And one of the example that I'm going to use is assuming that you are a person who might have some kind of abdominal cancer or colon cancer and you're scheduled for surgery. So, one of the things that will happen before the surgery is you will talk to a surgical nurse or you will talk to the anesthesiologist or you'll talk to the surgeon themselves and they will prepare you for the surgery. And they will say, you know, well, the surgery is going to take this long and it is this serious and these might be the complications that arise from it and you're going to have to cleanse your colon and you're going to have to take these sedatives and you're going to be in the hospital this long. And all of this stuff happens before you even get into the hospital. They prepare you for it. That's what has to happen with addiction recovery. And the purpose of all of these videos up until now is to prepare you with accurate knowledge about what an addiction is before you enter treatment. And if your counselor or therapist isn't reasonably well informed about all of this stuff, they're not going to be able to deliver the service that you need. So, the way I view counseling and therapy and addictions treatment centers and helping people to recover from addiction is that this is just as complicated as brain surgery. And that's why I wrote the two books. It's like the Green Book, Spiritual Transformation, is like just over 600 pages. And the Blue Book, the Addiction Recovery Handbook, is very close to 400 pages. So, in those 1,000 pages of my book, I explain what I consider to be the basics of knowledge about addiction, preparing you for addiction, taking you through the process of addiction, and what you can look for after you've left treatment. It is that complicated. Now, what stands against addiction recovery is our culture, our society that we live in, and certainly since the Industrial Revolution, our culture and society is designed to create addicted behavior. Our society and our culture is actually the fertilizer, it's the feeding ground, it's the basis out of what addiction grows, where it comes out of. In order to be successful in this culture, you have to be addicted to some degree. It's based on greed. It's based on the impossibility of chasing after youth. It's based upon the demeaning aspects of wealth and the rejection of poverty. So this culture in itself is designed to create addiction. But at the same time, the culture that's designed to create addiction is also designed so that it looks like the addiction is the addict's fault. We've created the general belief, the general attitude that somehow as an addict, especially alcoholics and drug addicts, are just socially irresponsible and defiant and just bad people, and they're morally corrupt, and if they would just kind of smarten up and do what they were told, then we'd all get along just fine. And there's a reason for that. Anyway, so the whole lecture series is designed to understand all of these preconditions, the existing conditions that make recovery more difficult. It's designed to prepare you, the therapist or the counselor, the family member who's trying to support them, politicians, the addicts themselves. It's designed to prepare you with accurate knowledge about what you're up against. And part of this, which I haven't been really specific about until now, is that one of the things addicts have to get in their mind when they're endeavoring to recover from addiction is the whole concept of responsibility. And the idea of responsibility is kind of in two different ways. The first way is that addicts that are entering treatment have to understand that a lot of the shame and the guilt that they feel about their addiction was imposed upon them by the society that we live in. This is an externally imposed guilt and shame, and the addict walks into recovery thinking they're bad or they're moral failures or there's something horribly wrong with them because of the way society, religious organizations, society at large, and political institutions teach them that they're bad. And I suppose, to a certain extent, that this externally imposed shame is that addicts and alcoholics generally have swallowed the Kool-Aid. And part of the education process is to teach them that they have to understand that a lot of the shame and the guilt they feel came from external sources. This is one of the gifts that John Bradshaw, out of the many, many gifts that John Bradshaw gave us in the 80s, was to understand that before we can move forward in recovery, we have to take responsibility and put responsibility back. So the first area of responsibility that addicts must understand is that not all of the shame and the guilt that they feel is their fault. But the second area of responsibility that they have to understand is that they are responsible for their recovery. They're responsible for getting better. They're responsible for the way that they participate. So there's this kind of dual focus responsibility. And I think, just as a quick recap, I want to start to explain again the idea of the 4 rules of addiction and recovery, because it leads into a deeper explanation of rigorous honesty and intention. So the first rule about addiction is, if you're acting out in addiction, you are guaranteed to create calamity or you're going to die early. The first rule is calamity or death is inevitable. The second rule is, if you're acting out in addiction, you cannot change the first rule. If you're acting out, you're going to create devastating consequences. You are going to hurt yourself. You are going to hurt the people around you, and you'll put yourself on the short list for pain and failure and death. The third rule is that if you can manage to attain some measure of sobriety or abstinence, what we call bottom line behavior, if you can manage to attain that, as soon as you take a drink or eat a chocolate cake or buy a prostitute, as soon as you act out, your thinking instantly changes. So you must understand that this is also inevitable. If you're an alcoholic and you've got a few weeks or months of sobriety, if you take a drink, your thinking instantly gets worse. You go from responsibility to blame. You go from honesty to dishonesty. You go from taking responsibility to making excuses. And this leads us into why addicts don't understand sincere intention and self-imposed guilt and shame. In the case of an addict, or a case of a food addict or a drug addict, or maybe a sex addict who uses pornography or who maybe buys prostitutes, an addict, an alcoholic, let's say an alcoholic will get up in the morning and they'll think, okay, I'm going to go to work today and I'm not going to drink, and I'm going to come home today because I want to be home for the Christmas party, or I want to be home for the birthday party. Or they'll think, I'm not going to drink today because I want to go away on our weekend vacation. And at the moment they make that commitment, and the addict or the alcoholic will say to their partner or their spouse, or they'll say to their boss, yeah, that's okay, I'm going to be here at 4 o'clock and I'm going to do this thing. When they make that commitment with the clear mind of being relatively sober, their intention is sincere. When the alcoholic walks out of the door at 8 o'clock in the morning and says, yeah, okay, dear, I'll be home for the kids' party, or I'll be home for the family dinner, they really mean it. But then, for some strange reason, they decide that one drink won't hurt, or they think, well, I'm just going to have one beer, and they show up 3 days later. It looks like their intention in the morning was insincere. And that's not true. When they made the statement they were going to show up for the party, they really meant it. But then when they wake up 3 days later in some strange city, or they completely destroy the family barbecue by picking a fight with somebody, they're puzzled by what happened. The addict themselves is just as puzzled by what happened as the people who witnessed the incident. So, at the time the intention is made, most often it's made sincerely. But because an addict or family members or therapists or counselors don't understand the mental triggers that go on in an addict's mind, they think it was insincere, but it was sincere. And so what happens is the addict can't talk about it because they can't explain what happened. And so they have shame and guilt from this lack of awareness, their puzzlement about what happened to their intention, because in their mind they know they really intended to be home for the party, but they weren't. And how you stop this is by somehow convincing an addict that there are 2 things that are imperative here. One of them is rigorous honesty with someone that they can trust, who understands addiction. And I don't mean just your old-fashioned sponsor. Being rigorously honest is one of the things that defeats the spiral into acting out behavior. Being rigorously honest with someone who knows what they're talking about or knows and understands the dynamics of addiction. The second thing is that being rigorously honest and sharing this in a very sincere way exposes old ideas. And this is significant because in traditional 12-step meetings, especially Alcoholics Anonymous, there's these 2 or 3 sentences in how it works, which is read at a lot of AA meetings, that Bill Wilson got correct. And the first thing he writes is that many of us, being alcoholics, many of us suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but we do recover if we have the capacity to be honest. And he spends a whole paragraph talking about the importance of rigorous honesty. And he talks about that before he says anything about the program of recovery. The way that he presents rigorous honesty is it's a preparation for doing the steps. So addicts and alcoholics need to understand the importance of rigorous honesty before they go anywhere into actual treatment. And the other thing he says that's of significant importance is many of us tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. That's a very, it's a very clear and succinct statement about clinging to old ideas. And the old ideas are, in the addict's mind, I'm no good, I can't be honest, I don't trust anybody, nobody cares about me, I don't understand what's going on, so therefore I can't talk about it, I can't explain myself, so I might as well keep it a secret. All of these old ideas contribute to relapse. And so rigorous honesty is the thing that prepares us to stop the relapse cycle. And if you're not willing to be honest with someone who actually knows what they're talking about, you will relapse. Now, just a very quick recap of some of the important things that I've talked about. Remember the definition of addiction. It's a pathological relationship with a mood-altering experience that has life-damaging consequences. Remember that all addicts live with polyaddictions. If you quit drinking, you got 2 or 3 other addictions that are lurking in the background. If you quit shopping and spending addictions, you got 2 or 3 addictions that are kind of maintenance addictions that are going to pick up the slack. Usually you address one addiction at a time. Deal with one, then deal with the other one, then deal with the next one. And out of this, remember that the fundamental issue in addiction recovery is understanding the complex nature of relationships. I read that sentence from step 8 in 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, where defective relationships has nearly always been the cause of our woes, including our alcoholism. In the definition of addiction, in the phenomenon of addiction, understand that addictions exist in failed, conflicted relationships. If you don't repair relationships, if you don't learn how to maintain honest relationships of integrity, if you don't know how to be rigorously honest in all of your relationships, then you'll be living in an addiction. And this is a global condition. Your relationships with the people you work with, the relationship with your boss, with your children, with your family, with your siblings, with your friends, with your casual acquaintances on the golf course. It doesn't matter where your relationships are. They will be flawed and defective. Addiction lives in flawed relationships. And the purpose of doing the steps, importantly, in the sequence that they're offered in, is that process of psychology. It's that process in the psychology of recovery where we learn how to repair all relationships. And if you don't do the steps in a detailed manner, preferably with the support of a therapist or counselor who knows what they're talking about, if you don't do the steps, then you won't be able to repair relationships. And if you look at them in a kind of a global way, the first step is to understand your relationship with your mental health, that you are sick. That's an internal relationship with yourself. Then the next few steps, up to step 5 or 6, is repairing the relationship with yourself in your perception of yourself. Addicts have perceptions of their self that they're innocent. They have perceptions of themselves that they're not responsible. They have perceptions of themselves that they're innocent and all the conflict belongs to other people. We have to change our perception of our relationship with ourself. And then steps 8 and 9 are the way that we heal relationships with other people so that we can clear up the harm that we caused and the pain and the suffering that we caused in relationships with other people. So in the first several steps, you heal your relationship with your perception of yourself, you heal relationship with yourself in the dynamic of responsibility, and then you heal relationships with other people so that you can repair the damage that you caused. And then in recovery, there's this thing we call maintenance steps. And maintenance steps are steps 10, 11, and 12. The maintenance steps are actually ways to prevent problems in relationship. Step 10 is to prevent problems in relationships where you have been rude or mean and inconsiderate, and you fix that. Step 11 is maintenance in the way that you understand your philosophy with yourself. And step 12 is the way that you maintain a spiritual relationship with other people. All of the 12 steps, everything about addiction recovery is about mental relationships with yourself, relationships with other people, and relationships with how you participate in community. That is the psychology of the sort of the transition out of addiction into a spiritual lifestyle. The way that we create addiction, going back to relationship, the way that we create addiction is by having unhealthy relationships in society, unhealthy relationships with the government, unhealthy relationships with the way that addicts participate, dishonesty in relationships, rejection and isolation within society, disapproval and persecution of certain groups in society. All of this creates problems, dysfunction, and dislocation in relationship. And this is one of the reasons that modern society, in the way that we foster relationships, damages our psychology of how we participate in society. It's all related to relationship, everything. So, the last thing I want to talk about just for a couple of minutes is, and this may offend a lot of people, but it is the truth as I understand it. If you're involved in addiction recovery, and it's a faith-based treatment, I talked about that in the first couple of videos. If you go to treatment and you're told that you have to find God and you have to say your prayers or you have to seek forgiveness, but you get to find your own version of a higher power, if your treatment is in any way based on a faith-based model, which was presented by Bill Wilson, it's not addiction treatment. It's indoctrination into religion. There's a difference between treatment of addiction and indoctrination into a Christian Protestant view of the world and how we participate in it. Now, Bill Wilson did the best he could in 1939, but he presented early recovery as faith-based treatment. And if you read the big book, from a theoretical point of view, what he's doing is he's telling you that if you can manage to stay sober and quit drinking and you become a good Protestant Christian, then you will recover from your alcoholism. And I talked a lot about this in the books, and I talked about this in the earlier videos. So if you're participating in faith-based treatment, it isn't really treatment. It's indoctrination into a Protestant Christian worldview. Now, if you are a person who is watching this video first or second because of the title, like the preparation for addiction recovery, you will be doing yourself a disservice. I would really encourage you to go back to the beginning, watch all of the videos at least once, hopefully twice. Make some notes and understand what you're up against. If you're a caregiver, if you're a therapist, if you're running a treatment center, be aware of what you're up against. Otherwise, you're not prepared for battle. And if you're not prepared for the battle of addiction recovery, you won't be able to offer the services to the addicts that they really need. And there's a couple of things I wrote down here now. So I guess it's first to understand the social and personal psychology that interferes with recovery. There's a social and a personal psychology of shame and guilt that's put upon us by social prejudice, that's put upon us by moral turpitude, persecution, and alienation, like the individual alienation from politicians and religions, and the serious degree of ignorance that people have about what an addiction is. And we have to embrace the mental illness aspect of psychology as the foundation of recovery. There's no moral turpitude involved in this. You are not a bad person if you're an addict trying to get better. And if you're sitting around thinking, well, those addicts are bad and that's not me, and if they just smarten up and do what they were told, if you're thinking that, you're probably in that second group of addicts who are addicted to religion or exercise or food or competition, or you like to think, well, those bad people are over there somewhere and I'm over here and I'm innocent. What I would ask you to remember is the people that you classify as those bad addicts on the other side of the street, that's somebody's brother, it's their sister, that's somebody's father, that's somebody's mother, that's a relative of somebody that is a struggling human being with a self-destructive mental condition. And the only way that we can help them is to understand the psychology of addiction. And that's what I'm going to get into in the next bunch of videos. So please, and I know it sounds self-serving, go back to the beginning, watch all of these 12 videos again so that you understand what you're up against, and then start the process of recovery. If you've watched all these videos, you've come a long way, and I appreciate your effort. So thank you very much, and I'll get the videos on the recovery process done as soon as I can. Bye for now.